Hello and welcome to Practical Inclusion. This time I'm on my own, so no guests today. So I really love to see people send questions and comments through. I can't see you, you can see me. So if you can let me know that you're there and that you're watching, that would be really wonderful. At whatever stage that you're watching this, whether it be live or on the replay. I know I've been a little bit slack on my LinkedIn profile recently. My head has absolutely been in delivery mode of projects, and you will see that I'm recruiting for a project officer currently to support me so that I can give myself more space and time to engage with you on these social media platforms, but to also, really focus on thought leadership and how we do better and be more impactful in the work that we're doing in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So apologies for some silence that you've had from me, but I'll endeavour to get straight onto that. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I live, work, and play on, which is the Wadawurrung people. And I want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. But I also want to give a huge big shout out to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are watching this show today live or on the replay, and absolutely state that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And as I've said many times in my training sessions recently, I think I've said it on one of my lives as well, I think it is really important for white Australians and people who are migrants to this country to right now be educating ourselves as much as possible around what the referendum will entail next year, what the key issues are surrounding it, and so we can be in a much better position to be the allies that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will need us to be going into this referendum. For those from the LGBTIQA+ community, we definitely acutely remember the plebiscite, the same-sex marriage debate, and the public discourse that surrounded that, and I'm concerned that this may be a very similar thing. And so our learnings from that can be to educate ourselves, speak up, act really as those true strong allies that we're needed, that we can be in this time going forward, and hopefully we end up with a positive result at the end of it. So as I said, for those who are just tuning in now, I'm on my own today, answering your questions, talking about some of the topics that I just want to talk about. But please, I'd love to see you put any questions or topics that you have in the comments, or just say g'day and let me know that you're listening in. I don't have my dad with me today. For those who missed out last week, I did interview Dad, who had a big event on Sunday called a tune-up for their organisation, Shedding the Blues, and he's out the front currently fixing my front path, and tells me that it all went really well and that there was plenty of attendees, and they've had plenty of interest for new members since then. So that's really good. All right, the first topic I've got to talk about today is about navigating online social media when we are discussing the issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, or when we have lived experience of being part of a underrepresented or marginalised group. And this has been on the top of my mind mainly for a number of reasons recently. One was because a former colleague of mine and dear friend, sorry, I've got a cough and it's like stuck right in my throat. A dear friend of mine was leading the project with the eSafety Commissioner around the LGBTIQA+ Learning Lounge. And I'll stick the little website up for you. Ramon got me to help out with the development of this. I played a very small role, but there were ACON, Transgender Victoria, a whole bunch of organisations that really got in and spent a lot of time developing this resource mainly for people who are LGBTIQA+, and how they navigate the online world, particularly with trolling, particularly with even it covers stuff like dating apps, it covers a whole range of different things, abuse that you may experience in digital forms. I think it is a brilliant resource. I'd highly encourage everybody to go and check it out and to share it around. This is a really tricky space. The social media platforms, the digital platforms really aren't protecting us in the way that they should. And so we need to be as proactive as we possibly can be to create that safe space. And resources like this really, really help. So it was a great opportunity that I had to be involved with that. And I guess what I've reflected on, having had to do the course to provide feedback on it, or to go through the resources, was that I had been very careful, which I think is warranted, to not step into conversations online that would perhaps attract trolls or haters onto my social media platforms. I've been very lucky. I've absolutely been trolled, and I've had people come quite aggressively on some of my platforms, but I've been able to block them all and haven't had anyone who's persistently been chasing me, I suppose. But I certainly know people who have, and I see it regularly on a lot of posts that I do follow and accounts that I do follow. And so it certainly made me lean into that a bit more in terms of when I do need to write something, when I do need to reply to comments, to act as an ally, to really support people who are doing that hard work, putting forward their advocacy and really getting hit by trolls or people who are just adamant about pushing back on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And so I'm doing that with a bit of trepidation and obviously a lot of, trying to do that as logically as I can and as safely as I can, but making sure I am standing up or showing up for those that need it, for those who are doing great work. One of the accounts that I've been following recently, I don't have the link here, I'll have to find it for you, is a person, an Aboriginal person, Blackfella Revolution, I think it's called, on Facebook, who is just putting out such amazing content, excellent content, and just being really bold and brash about it. And I really love that. So I'm interested to hear of any other accounts that you're following that are doing similar things. And, one of the people who I know very well, Cara from the Pride Cup, I noticed she's very active in calling out bigotry when she sees it online and hatred, and it constantly pops up in my feed, and I really admire the work that she's doing. It's not because we think in any way we're going to necessarily educate the people who are making those really hateful comments. Usually they're pretty shut down to the idea that there could be other ways of thinking, but it's about the message that it sends to the poster and to all the other people who read it, who are from those marginalised communities. So I think it is really important that we keep making comments where we can. One of the things that I did recently, there was a Catholic bishop, I think it was a bishop, I'm not sure with all the titles that they have, but he made a post about the resignation of the guy who was appointed to the head of the Essendon Football Club, and a day later resigned because he was also currently holding a position as the head of a church that had some really LGBTIQA plus unfriendly views, to put it nicely. And obviously there was a huge social media backlash about this, people saying that their faith and their religions was being threatened, and that of course he could hold both those positions at the same time, and that they weren't his personal beliefs necessarily. To me, it doesn't matter. He absolutely shouldn't be head of the Essendon Football Club if they value inclusion, and they clearly do, because that was wrapped up, but I think they made a big mistake in appointing him in the first place. But one of the Catholic bishops wrote about how awful it was that people were being censored in that way, and discriminated against because of their faith. And I made it very clear that I was not going to cop that kind of comment. This is not discrimination against religion. This is saying that if you are going to promote hate speech, if you're going to be the head of an organisation that actually has hate speech on their website, then you don't belong as the head of any organisation in this country. You can't hide your hateful, discriminatory behaviours behind religion. That's my very strong belief. I think there are many people who I know who are religious, who hold very, who are very true to their religion and hold true to their religious beliefs, but also recognise that God made us the way that we are, and that people should be accepted and included and valued for that, whoever they are, and that this isn't about opinions and beliefs. This is actually about identity. Just like somebody doesn't choose to be born into a family of 5 in Brunswick, I didn't choose to be queer or LGBTIQA+. I would choose it. I absolutely love it. But this is not a choice. This is not lifestyle choices that people are making. This is who we are. And you can't have beliefs around that that argue against our existence, I suppose. It's as simple as that. So it is a human rights issue, and I'm really grateful to see that the Essendon Football Club responded in the way that they did. And if you don't follow the Purple Bombers, which are the Essendon's LGBTIQA+ group, do that, because they made some really great statements about it too. It seems like a positive outcome for all. So go check out the LGBTIQA+ Learning Lounge if that's of interest to you. One of the other reports I saw today was around a research report that showed, surprise, surprise, women were happier post-divorce than men. Of course, we'll call out that the report didn't refer to gender-diverse or non-binary people. But, many people will say this is not such a surprise. And this is not a surprise because, unfortunately, still in this country, women are shouldering the majority of the domestic load. And so when a divorce does happen, marriage breakdown does happen, and if the custody arrangements of kids, if there are kids involved, do reflect some kind of 50-50 arrangement, which is something that I have with my former partner, then all of a sudden there is equality in terms of that domestic load, well, at least in some cases. And so people are going to feel happier if they don't have to shoulder as much of that domestic load. Why am I talking about this now? I think we need to push harder and harder, and I'm always talking about this. We need to push harder and harder around creating gender equality in terms of who has responsibility for what in our homes. We need to be sending this message to our children very strongly. We need this message to be sent in our workplaces. We're still seeing every training session I do, people will say that one of the things they notice around gender stereotypes in their workplace is that it's the women who are always taking the notes, it's the women who are always cleaning up the kitchen. And my camera's gone a bit fuzzy again, so apologies for that. But the reality is that's what we're seeing, and that's what we're seeing in people's homes. So I'm not surprised by that report, but it's a really big reminder for us to continue pushing to create that gender equality and to challenge those gender stereotypes and gender roles that people are experiencing. Now I'm going to finish up in a second because I need to get going with the rest of my day. But if you do have questions, send them through, even if you're watching this on the replay, and I'll get back to you via chat for sure. I guess the other thing that I was interested to discuss today was around the impact that reports or reviews on sexual harassment and discrimination when they occur in workplaces, and what we see as some of the common responses that people have to that. Typically what happens is there will be a report that will show maybe that there is or a survey data that shows that there is sexual harassment occurring in the workplace at a level much higher than what anybody would want to see. Obviously, we want to see zero, but sometimes we see, that quite significantly higher in some organisations. And one of the comments that I constantly get from employees is a real desire to understand the exact numbers of people that are experiencing this and how is it verified, and how many of these cases have been investigated and come to conclusion. And there's this real focus around data. And I totally understand that. I'm a data nerd. I'm all about creating, wanting to have all of our actions informed by data and really understanding the data. Unfortunately, in the sexual harassment space, that's not always possible. Number one, because people don't want to identify. And so a lot of the data that's collected is confidential anyway. And so we can quote numbers, but we can't quote, whether these cases have been investigated or anything beyond that, because we might have just asked people in a survey if they've experienced it. Or the responses that we may have gotten, the sample sizes are too low to report on that data. And we need to maintain that confidentiality. But the real issue for me is why is that the question that comes from people when they hear about these types of reports? I would like to believe that the majority of people who hear that there is sexual harassment or discrimination occurring in their workplaces, that their initial response should be far out, we've got to fix that. Unfortunately, I do hear a lot of this pushing against it. That can't be true here. The reality is it's true in many workplaces, and I think just that focus itself on this can't be true, as opposed to let's fix this, is really hurtful and harmful and kind of perpetuates the harm that's occurring. And particularly voicing those opinions perpetuates that harm, I think. So I think it's really important for us to be reflective and actually say, no, hang on, nobody should be experiencing this behaviour in the workplace. And just say for some bizarre reason that data is not true and accurate, who cares? Because the actions that we're going to take, that we're going to put in place to address incidences of sexual harassment, discrimination, are going to be good and positive for everyone. This is going to improve our workplace. So I just encourage people, if that happens in your workplace, if you see those, yearly survey data getting spoken about, and you hear people saying, oh, I want to see, what is even the numbers of this? What's the percentage of this? Can we report on this all the time? I want to see the data. Just maybe challenge them to think about, don't we really just want to focus on how we fix it? How do we eliminate sexual harassment from our workplaces like we should be doing? And if we do that, and if we take those actions, we will actually make things better for everybody. And thanks for that comment, Brett. Absolutely, denial is hurtful and perpetuates the harm. And this, I think, goes beyond just the topic that I'm talking about now. This happens in a range of different areas that I will be discussing or training around diversity, equity, and inclusion, where people do deny that there's a problem in the first place. And we've got to shift that thinking away from that. It's more important to think, all right, well, how can we make this workplace better for everybody? There was some great research I found the other day that showed, and it was from the Diversity Council Australia, you can find it on their website. It showed that in organisations that were really focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, the fascinating thing was that I think the data showed 5 different questions that asked employees around their job satisfaction and their engagement at work, and their levels of respect that they experienced at work. And in those organisations that were doing diversity, equity, and inclusion, the men were actually having way better experiences than they were having in organisations that weren't doing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is kind of, we get into these workplaces and we start working on gender equity or diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we get this immediate pushback. Men worried that they're going to experience reverse discrimination, in their words, that they're now no longer got opportunities for career promotion because every leadership job's going to women, that it's all about the women now, and they don't get access to any professional development opportunities. I hear this constantly. And the reality is, and that data showed, that actually everybody in an organisation is better off when we do diversity, equity, and inclusion. No one's missing out. Everyone's better off. And I think we need to keep our focus there and really connect with people in that way, that this is about creating a workplace that's better for all of us. It's also one of the reasons I'm really, I push for organisations to do, if they're going to create an inclusion plan, that it is about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's not specifically LGBTIQA plus inclusion, or it's not specifically gender equality. There's absolutely nuanced actions that we need to take for particular underrepresented and marginalised groups, 100%. But I think the communication and the message is more impactful and spreads wider when we do go from that, let's create diverse, equitable and inclusive workplaces for all. And it also at the same time allows us to address intersectionality, which a lot of our single issue diversity and inclusion plans don't. So that's just a little side note from me. I think it's really important that we take that broad view and that broad lens from an engagement perspective, but also to make sure that we don't leave people behind. So that's enough talking for me today, because I've run a 3-hour training session this morning, and then I've had a meeting, and now I'm doing this, and I really need to get off screen. So I want to say, please reach out to me if you have any questions about anything I've said or any of the work that we're doing. Please reach out to me if you're interested in the project officer role with my organisation. I'm needing somebody to support me on project work on building diversity, equity and inclusion plans. And I'm really interested in hearing from anyone, particularly people from underrepresented, marginalised, minority groups, backgrounds. I'm absolutely living the talk, I suppose. So please reach out to me if you're interested in the role in any way, shape or form. I've just had a quick question there from Emma. Could you talk more about that? I think, Emma, you're referring to doing diversity, equity and inclusion plans as opposed to the individual ones. I hope that's what you mean. I'm happy to talk more about that. I really do think that there's a balance here, that when organisations reach out and say we want to do an LGBTIQA+ inclusion plan, that we should do that. They should absolutely have some focused actions and run focus groups to understand what the experience is of LGBTIQA+ people. But I think that can be weaved up into an overall diversity, equity and inclusion plan. Because, yeah, thanks, Emma, it is around that intersectionality. Because our real danger is when we do an LGBTIQA+ plan, we don't also take into account the experiences of people who are LGBTIQA+ and have disability, or also are from a cultural or ethnic background that is not of the majority that's in that organisation. And we miss that intersectional piece. So I think we have to do it as a diversity, equity and inclusion plan, and then make sure we specifically understand the different lived experiences people are having. The other reason I think it's really important is because when we do the research to build those plans, so when we do focus groups and surveys, we identify there the people who are having the most challenging experiences in that workplace. And they're not, sometimes they're not the people that you would have actually gone to focus on first. I don't know if you've seen that. There's a great YouTube video, Diversish, and it talks about, in a kind of mockingly way, it's quite much of a joke, that the way organisations say we're doing gender equality now, and in a couple of years, then we'll do disability, or then we'll do race, and that just creates totally adverse outcomes. We can't do that. It's ludicrous. If we're going to create actions that are LGBTIQA+ inclusive, they have to be inclusive of all LGBTIQA+ people. And so I think if we're going to look at our recruitment process, we look at our recruitment process under a diversity, equity and inclusion strategy, and we might identify a bunch of actions in there that might be specific to particular groups' experience, and that might also translate across the experiences of many different groups of people with different backgrounds. And so we can save resource, we can save time, and we can also ensure that our actions and our approach is intersectional. So hopefully that explains a bit more what I was talking about. The last thing I just wanted to say is that this Thursday we have the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Network session. I run these once a month. You can join up to be a member of the network, and it's a one-off fee and you're in for 12 months. You can show up anytime. There's no participation. There's no role. We don't take the role. You show up when it makes sense to you. And this week we're going to discuss misdirected good intentions. So this idea that so many of us are well-intentioned and we want to be as inclusive as we can be, but sometimes we miss the mark. and how, as diversity, equity, and inclusion professionals or people who are interested and passionate in this space, how we kind of redirect that good intent and that goodwill and create allies who are actually making meaningful change and not potentially making things a little bit harder for others. Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'm just reading through your comment. Race, caste, religion, and LGBTQ+ is a particular challenge in our India teams. Can you hear any examples where you've seen these combined? I haven't worked with any Indian organisations yet, but I've certainly seen a lot of survey data that is showing that people from the subcontinent, from Southeast Asia as well, are having some really challenging times in Australian workplaces. And I don't think that's a huge surprise to many, but we need to make sure that we are being a lot more deliberate about our inclusion efforts around race and cultural background. And there's some organisations who are doing some great stuff in that space. So I don't have any specific examples, but I would direct you to Budi Sadatu, who is a Australian, but has an Indonesian background and is Muslim and is LGBTIQA+, and is absolutely the person I'd go to in that space to talk about that particular issue, not from India specifically, but certainly about the intersections of race, religion, and LGBTIQA+ experiences. All right, I've got to jump off. As I said, I've talked too much today. Thank you for those who have been listening in and for commenting. Keep your comments and questions going. We'll do another one of these soon. And I've got some other great guests coming up as well. So see you all next time and enjoy the rest of your day.